Some nights, the forest isn't just quiet. It feels alive. The wind whispers through the trees, shadows stretch in impossible ways, and every step you take echoes like someone or something is right behind you. Tonight, we're diving deep into Appalachia to uncover 7 true park ranger encounters. Stories so chilling that even those who spend their lives in these woods couldn't explain what they saw. Before we step further into the darkness, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that like button and share this with anyone who thinks they're brave enough to hear the truth. And I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments if you'd survive a night in these woods. Now, let's begin. I'd been patrolling the Blue Ridge Trail longer than I planned, the kind of day where the forest stretches endlessly and the sun feels like it's setting faster than it should. The trail I'd chosen was one of the older, less used paths. Roots twisting through the dirt, gaps in the foliage where the trees leaned in close as if whispering secrets to one another. At first, everything seemed normal. The wind sifted through the leaves, carrying the faint smell of wet pine and decaying wood. Birds chirped somewhere above me, though their calls felt oddly distant, muffled, like echoes from another world. I had my flashlight ready, though the day wasn't dark yet. I was alone, and that was just fine, until I heard it. Soft, deliberate footsteps behind me. At first, I laughed nervously, imagining another ranger from a neighboring post or some lost hiker trying to find their way. But when I stopped and looked back, there was nothing. The trail lay empty, framed by trees that seemed to lean in a little closer, shadows stretching long and strange across the earth. I called out, my voice brittle in the quiet. "Hello? Ranger here." The words barely carried. The wind rustled the leaves, masking any further sounds, yet the footsteps didn't stop. Every time I started moving, they mirrored me, always a beat behind, always just out of sight. My stomach sank as I realized I had no idea what was following me, or if it was even human. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing against my chest in a way I couldn't shake. I tried to focus on the trail, but the shadows seemed to move with me, shifting in ways they shouldn't. The familiar bends and roots I knew so well became a labyrinth, twisting under the dimming light. I thought about turning back, but every time I glanced over my shoulder, there was nothing, just the dark, watching forest. My flashlight caught glimpses of movement. A branch snapping here, a shadow darting there, always gone the moment I tried to identify it. Panic pricked at the edges of my mind. I was a trained ranger. I'd walked these trails hundreds of times, yet nothing about this felt natural. The forest had grown quiet, the usual chorus of wildlife gone. Even the wind felt muted, like it was holding its breath. I tried to tell myself it was a deer, or maybe a stray hiker messing with me, but deep down, I knew better. There was an intelligence in the way those footsteps followed, deliberate and patient. I sped up, trying to keep my own pace unpredictable, but no matter how fast I moved, the echo followed. My heartbeat thumped so loud I could hear it in my ears, yet the forest was deathly silent otherwise, save for that soft, haunting rhythm behind me. I called out again, desperation creeping into my voice, but my words seemed to vanish into the dark. Whatever was out there wasn't interested in being seen. It just wanted to follow. Darkness fell faster than I expected, swallowing the trail and folding the forest in thick, inky shadows. My flashlight flickered, as if uncertain itself about the path ahead, and I realized the forest had changed. Roots that were familiar became jagged obstacles. Branches blocked passages I knew existed. Every turn seemed to lead deeper into a maze. My hands shook as I gripped the flashlight, trying to keep my focus. Each step forward was mirrored by the quiet, steady cadence behind me. I began to run, ignoring the gnarled roots and low branches, but the feeling of being stalked never left. Every sound I made, every crack of a twig underfoot, felt amplified, answered by another that wasn't mine. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time didn't exist in that space. My energy waned, but the footsteps never faltered. There was no mistaking it. I was being watched. I could feel eyes on me, though I couldn't see anything. Sometimes I thought I glimpsed a figure in my peripheral vision, but when I looked directly, there was nothing. It was as though the forest itself had grown alive, moving with me, breathing with me, keeping pace without form. I shouted again, louder this time, more frantic, but the voice seemed swallowed, absorbed by the dense, suffocating trees. I felt the panic coil in my stomach, turning tight and sharp. I wanted to scream, to fight back, to do something, but what could I do against a presence I couldn't see, couldn't even begin to understand? Finally, I spotted the clearing ahead, the small gravel lot where I'd parked my truck. Relief washed over me, but even as I sprinted toward it, the steps behind me never stopped. I reached the clearing, chest heaving, legs trembling so badly I had to grab the hood of the truck to steady myself. I glanced back once more. The forest was still, silent, but I could swear I heard the faintest echo of those steps fading into the trees, patient, deliberate, unyielding. I jumped into the truck, locked the doors, and sat shaking for what felt like hours, staring at the tree line, expecting something, anything to emerge. Eventually, I started the engine and drove away, but the moment I left the shadow of the mountains behind, the echo stopped. I've gone back to the trail since, during the day, but something about that night changed it. The forest feels different now, quieter in ways that make my skin crawl. I can't shake the memory of being followed, the rhythm of footsteps that weren't mine. I tell myself it was just nerves, the wind or exhaustion, but I know better. There was a presence, patient and unseen, moving with me, waiting for the right moment. Even now, months later, when I close my eyes in my own home, I can hear those soft steps behind me, and the memory twists into the sound of my own heartbeat, uneven and terrified. I keep telling myself it was just the forest, that it wasn't real. But deep down, I know the forest never forgets. And I know it remembers me. I've never been able to walk that trail alone at night again. Even during the day, I keep my eyes on the trees, counting shadows, measuring the silence. I still hear it sometimes, faint and patient, in the hum of the wind, in the creak of an old cabin door. And every time I do, I'm reminded that the Blue Ridge holds its secrets close, and some of them don't like to be ignored. I was already tired when I found the cabin, the kind of tired that settles into your bones and makes the forest feel heavier than usual. It was a solo night patrol, routine on paper, but the fog had rolled in thick between the pines, turning my flashlight beam into a narrow tunnel of pale light. The trail I was following wasn't used much anymore. Most hikers stayed closer to the main routes, and even other rangers avoided this stretch unless they had to. That's probably why the cabin caught me off guard. It wasn't visible from the trail at first. I only noticed it because the trees ahead of me looked wrong, too evenly spaced, like they'd been cut back deliberately. When I pushed past the last line of pines, there it was. A small, sagging structure crouched in the darkness like it didn't want to be seen. The first thing that hit me was how out of place it felt. I'd worked this section of the Blue Ridge for years. I knew the old hunting shacks, the abandoned fire watch posts, even the ruins that barely counted as buildings anymore. This cabin wasn't on any map, not even the outdated ones we kept in the station. No reports mentioned it. No complaints, no notes, nothing. It was just there. The roof dipped in the middle, the boards dark with age and moisture. No light inside. No sound except the faint creak of trees swaying somewhere deeper in the forest. I told myself it was probably an old private structure, forgotten over time. Still, my hand tightened on the flashlight as I stepped closer. The door was slightly ajar, hanging open just enough to reveal darkness inside. That bothered me more than if it had been locked. A locked door meant someone wanted to keep others out. An open one felt like an invitation or a warning. I announced myself out loud, my voice sounding too loud, too thin in the fog. "Park ranger, anyone inside?" The words didn't echo. They just dropped dead in the air. I waited, listening. Nothing answered. After a moment, I pushed the door open the rest of the way. The smell inside hit me immediately. Damp wood, mold, and beneath it, something sharper, metallic, like old blood or rust. The air was cold, colder than it should have been for the time of year, and it clung to my skin as I stepped in. My flashlight swept across the room, catching dust particles drifting lazily in the beam. The place was small. One main room, a narrow doorway leading toward what might have been a back room. There was a table against one wall, cluttered with random items. An old tin cup, scraps of paper too worn to read, a pocket knife with a darkened blade. A chair lay tipped over on its side near the center of the room, like someone had stood up too fast and never come back. What struck me was the absence of life. No sleeping bag, no fresh food, no footprints in the dust. It didn't look actively lived in, but it didn't look abandoned either. It felt paused, like whatever story belonged to this place had been interrupted mid-sentence. I crouched to examine the floor, noticing scuff marks near the doorway, overlapping patterns that didn't quite make sense. They weren't boot prints, they weren't animal tracks either. I straightened up, suddenly aware of how quiet it was. Too quiet. Even the forest outside seemed to have pulled back, leaving the cabin wrapped in an unnatural stillness. That's when I heard the scratching. At first, it was so faint I thought I imagined it. A soft, dragging sound, like fingernails lightly brushing against wood. It came from somewhere inside the walls. I froze, holding my breath, listening harder. The sound stopped. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I told myself it was a mouse, maybe a raccoon that had gotten into the crawl space. That explanation didn't hold for long. When I took a step forward, the scratching started again, this time directly beside me. Slow, intentional, and unmistakably following my movement. I moved toward the back doorway, my flashlight shaking now, and the sound shifted with me, staying parallel, always just out of sight. I pressed my ear lightly against the wall, feeling the faintest vibration beneath the wood. Whatever was in there wasn't trapped. It wasn't panicking. It was pacing, matching me step for step. A cold wave of fear washed over me, and suddenly the cabin felt much smaller, the walls closer than before. I backed away, whispering to myself to stay calm, to leave, to get back to the trail and call it in. When I turned toward the door, something felt wrong. The doorway looked farther away than it should have been, the shadows stretching unnaturally between me and the exit. I took a step, then another, and the scratching grew louder, faster, like it was excited. The beam of my flashlight flickered, briefly plunging the room into darkness, and in that instant, I felt a pressure in the air, like someone standing inches behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed that if I did, something terrible would happen. I broke into a run, boots slipping on the uneven floor, chair legs clattering as I brushed past them. The doorway seemed to recede, the darkness swallowing the edges of my vision. The scratching erupted into a frantic scuttle inside the walls, surrounding me, above me, beneath me. I burst through the door and stumbled out into the fog, gasping for air that felt suddenly too thin. I I didn't stop running until I hit the trail, my lungs burning, my legs threatening to give out beneath me. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every snap of a twig behind me made my heart leap into my throat. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something emerge from the trees, but the forest remained empty, silent. The scratching was gone, replaced by a deeper, heavier sensation, like being watched from a distance. When I finally reached the station hours later, safe under fluorescent lights and familiar walls, the relief didn't come. I kept replaying the cabin in my mind, the way the walls had seemed to breathe, the way the sound had followed me with such intention. I filed a report, vague enough to avoid sounding unhinged. An unregistered structure, strange noises, possible wildlife. The words felt hollow even as I wrote them. That night, lying on the narrow cot in the bunk room, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the building made my muscles tense. At one point, I thought I heard scratching. Soft, distant, coming from somewhere behind the walls of the station. I told myself it was just pipes, just my imagination. Still, I didn't move until morning. We went back during the day, 3 of us. Same coordinates, same trail. The pines were thick, the fog gone, sunlight filtering down in pale shafts, but the cabin wasn't there. No clearing, no disturbed ground, just uninterrupted forest, like nothing had ever been built there at all. The others gave me looks they tried to hide, confused, skeptical. I laughed it off, said I must have gotten turned around in the dark, but I know what I saw. Sometimes, late at night when the station is quiet and the mountains press close around the windows, I catch that same metallic smell in the air. Sometimes I wake up convinced I hear something moving just beyond the walls, keeping pace with my breathing. And no matter how many times I tell myself it was just a cabin, just an animal, just exhaustion, I can't shake the fear that I didn't leave that place empty. That something noticed me, memorized me, and followed me back into the world, patient as the forest itself. I'd taken that trail because it was quiet. That was the whole reason. It ran near an old ranger post that hadn't been staffed in years, a forgotten spur most hikers never bothered with. I still had paperwork to finish, incident reports and maintenance logs, and I figured I could sit at one of the old benches near the post, listen to the woods, and knock it out before heading back. The sun was already dropping behind the peaks when I parked, painting the sky in dull oranges and bruised purples. I told myself I had plenty of time. I always did. The trail felt different from the start. Not threatening, just empty. The kind of emptiness that presses against your ears. My boots sounded too loud on the dirt, every crunch of gravel echoing longer than it should have. The old ranger post came into view, little more than a weathered structure with peeling paint and a sagging roof. I set my pack down, leaned against the railing, and pulled out my clipboard. For a while, everything was normal. The forest breathed around me. Insects hummed. Somewhere far off, an owl called. I was halfway through my notes when the light faded faster than expected, the shadows stretching long and deep between the trees. By the time I packed up, the forest was already slipping into darkness. I switched on my flashlight and started back down the trail, the beam cutting a narrow tunnel through the trees. That's when I heard it. A low whisper, barely audible at first, like someone speaking just beyond the edge of hearing. I stopped, holding my breath. The sound didn't come from one place. It seemed to drift from everywhere at once, weaving through the trunks and branches. I told myself it was wind moving through leaves, or maybe water somewhere downhill. Appalachia is full of strange acoustics. Sounds travel oddly here. I kept walking. The whispering followed. It grew clearer with each step. Not louder exactly, but more defined. The cadence felt wrong, too deliberate. I swung my flashlight from side to side, catching nothing but bark and shadow. No movement, no figures. Just trees standing too close together, their branches tangling overhead like they were trying to block out the sky. I laughed under my breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I'd spent years in these woods. Fear had a way of playing tricks on you when you let your imagination wander. Then the whispers formed words. Not words I recognized, not English or anything I could place, but unmistakably speech. Syllables rose and fell, overlapping, layering over one another. It sounded like multiple voices speaking at once, too soft to understand, but too structured to ignore. My flashlight flickered, the beam dimming before snapping back to life. My chest tightened. I picked up my pace, boots moving faster along the trail. The whispering adjusted with me, sliding closer, curling around my ears. I glanced back, and my stomach dropped. The trail behind me was gone. Where there should have been a narrow path winding back toward the ranger post, there was only dense woods. No opening, no clear line through the undergrowth, just trees and brush packed tight, as if the trail had never existed at all. I turned slowly in a circle, my light darting frantically, searching for something familiar. My pulse hammered in my throat. I knew this trail. I'd walked it dozens of times. Trails don't just disappear. The whispering grew bolder, the voices pressing in, threading through one another in a way that made my skin crawl. It felt like they were reacting to my panic, feeding off it. I tried to retrace my steps, pushing through what I thought had to be the right direction, but the forest fought me. Branches snagged my sleeves, roots tripped my boots. Every wrong turn brought the whispers closer, sharper, almost amused. I could have sworn I heard my name in there somewhere, stretched thin and broken between unfamiliar sounds. I shouted then, not words, just noise, a raw, desperate sound torn from my chest. It disappeared into the trees without echo, swallowed whole. The forest felt wrong, like it had shifted while I wasn't looking, rearranged itself around me. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of damp earth and rot. My flashlight flickered again, longer this time, and in that brief dimness, I felt a pressure all around me, like I was standing in the center of a crowd I couldn't see. I started running. There was no direction to it, no plan, just forward. My lungs burned as I pushed through brush and low branches, my legs screaming in protest. The whispers chased me, no longer soft but insistent, rising and falling in waves. Sometimes they sounded close enough that I could feel breath against my ears. Other times they stretched out, surrounding me, guiding me deeper, or maybe herding me somewhere I didn't want to go. I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. Time lost all meaning. My sense of distance collapsed. I don't know how long I ran. Minutes, maybe longer. The forest blurred into a tunnel of shadow and pain. My foot caught on a root and I went down hard, the air knocked from my lungs. I lay there for a split second, stunned, the whispering washing over me like a tide. In that moment, I was sure I wouldn't get back up. Sure that whatever lived in those voices was waiting for me to give up. Then I saw the road. It cut across the darkness ahead like a scar, pale and solid beneath my flashlight beam. I scrambled to my feet and staggered toward it, nearly crying from relief. The moment my boots hit the asphalt, the whispers faltered. Not gone, just confused. I stood there, bent over, gasping for air, my heart threatening to tear itself out of my chest. The forest loomed on either side of the road, quiet again, almost innocent. If not for the sweat soaking my clothes and the tremor in my hands, I might have believed none of it had happened. I didn't linger. I got into my truck and drove, tires humming against the pavement, the headlights carving a path through the night. But the whispering followed. not outside the truck, inside my head. Faint at first, like a memory replaying itself, then stronger, riding the rhythm of the road. I turned up the radio. Static. I turned it off. The voices slid back in, overlapping, murmuring just beyond comprehension. Every time I checked the mirrors, I expected to see something standing in the road behind me. It wasn't until I reached town, the glow of streetlights washing over me, that the whispers finally began to fade. Even then, they didn't disappear completely. They lingered at the edges of my hearing, like an echo that refused to die. I went straight home, locked the door behind me, and sat on the floor with my back against it, breathing until my hands stopped shaking. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the trail vanishing, the trees closing in. I heard the voices again, patient and knowing. The next day, I reported the incident in the vaguest terms possible. Disorientation, poor visibility, equipment malfunction. I didn't mention the whispers. I didn't mention the way the forest seemed to move. I went back once, weeks later during daylight, with another ranger. The trail was there, clear and unchanged. The old ranger post stood exactly where it always had. Nothing felt wrong. My partner joked about me getting spooked by shadows. I laughed along, but I stayed close to the road. Sometimes, late at night. When everything is quiet, I still hear it, a low whisper just beneath the hum of the world. I can never make out the words, but I know they're meant for me. And every time I hear them, I wonder if I really escaped that night or if the forest simply let me go, knowing I'd never truly leave it behind. The lookout tower had been decommissioned years ago, at least officially. Most nights it sat empty, a splintered silhouette against the ridgeline, but during dry seasons they still rotated us through it when fire risk was high. That night was mine. Solo shift, no backup. I remember thinking how quiet everything felt as I climbed the stairs, the metal steps groaning under my boots like they resented being used again. By the time I reached the platform, the sun was already gone, leaving the mountains layered in dark blues and blacks, fading into one another until the horizon disappeared entirely. The wind was calm. Too calm. Usually, up there, you could count on a steady breeze, something to remind you that the world was still moving. That night, the air felt suspended, heavy and still, as if the forest below was holding its breath. I set up my gear, checked my radio, and scanned the tree line with binoculars out of habit more than urgency. No smoke, no lights, just endless forest rolling away into darkness. For the first hour, nothing happened. I leaned against the railing, listening to the faint creak of the tower as it settled, the distant calls of night birds echoing through the valleys. It was peaceful in a way that made you lower your guard. That's probably why the movement caught my eye so sharply when it finally happened. At the edge of the tree line, far below, something shifted. At first, it looked like a trick of shadow, the kind your eyes make when you stare too long into darkness. But then it moved again. Slow, deliberate, sliding along the trees as if walking parallel to the ridge. I raised my binoculars, adjusting the focus. The shape blurred, then vanished entirely. I lowered the lenses, heart thumping once, hard in my chest. A moment later, it was back. Not where it had been before, but farther down the ridge, in a place it shouldn't have been able to reach that quickly. The shape was wrong, not clearly human, not clearly anything else. Just a darker smear against the dark forest, moving with intention. I tracked it unconsciously, shifting my stance along the railing as it moved. That's when I realized something that made my stomach tighten. It was pacing me. When I stepped left, it drifted left. When I leaned forward, it slipped closer to the edge of the trees. The distance between us stayed the same, no matter how I moved. A cold line of fear slid down my spine. I told myself it had to be another ranger, maybe someone checking something off the books, but I knew the schedule. No one else was assigned that night. No one was supposed to be anywhere near that tower. I lifted the binoculars again, forcing my hands to stay steady. The moment the lenses aligned with the shadow, it vanished. Completely. Like someone had switched off a light. I scanned the area, breathing shallowly, eyes straining. Nothing. The forest returned to its quiet, unbroken mass. I exhaled, half laughing under my breath, embarrassed by my own nerves. Then it reappeared, closer. Close enough that I could tell it wasn't a trick of light. The shape stood just inside the tree line now, tall and narrow, its edges bleeding into the surrounding darkness. I couldn't see details, couldn't make out limbs or a face, but I knew I was being watched. The feeling was unmistakable. My skin prickled and my pulse hammered in my ears. I reached for the radio, thumb pressing the transmit button harder than necessary. "Look out to base," I said, trying to keep my voice level. The radio answered with a burst of static so loud it made me flinch. I tried again. Same result. Static, layered and harsh, almost rhythmic. For a split second, buried beneath it, I thought I heard something else, a faint, warbling sound that almost resembled a voice, but it was gone before I could be sure. I lowered the radio slowly. The shadow hadn't moved. It didn't need to. Minutes dragged by, stretching thin and unbearable. I forced myself to keep scanning for fires, for anything normal to anchor my mind, but my eyes kept drifting back to that spot. Sometimes the shape would slip behind a tree and disappear. Each time, my breath caught, only for it to emerge again somewhere new. Always maintaining that same distance, always aware of my movements. I stopped moving entirely, testing it. The shadow froze too. That was when the fear truly set in. Hours passed like that. I don't know how many. Time up there lost meaning, broken only by the occasional glance at my watch and the slow crawl of the night sky overhead. The forest below remained unnaturally quiet. No insects, no distant animal calls, just the soft groan of the tower and my own breathing. Every attempt to call in ended the same way, static, thick and insistent, as if the radio itself didn't want me to be heard. At some point, my legs started to ache from standing so rigidly. I shifted my weight, and the shadow shifted with me. It felt less like it was watching the tower and more like it was watching me specifically, studying my movements, learning them. The thought crept into my mind, unwelcome and impossible to shake. It wasn't lost. It wasn't passing through. It had come there for a reason. For me. The cold seeped in as the night wore on, biting through my jacket. I wrapped my arms around myself, teeth clenched, eyes burning from the strain of staring into darkness. I wondered what would happen if I climbed down, if I left the tower and tried to reach my truck. The thought sent a jolt of panic through me. Whatever that thing was, it knew where I was, knew how I moved. I wasn't sure I'd make it down the stairs before it closed the distance. So I stayed. Sometime before dawn, the sky began to lighten, the blackness thinning into gray. The first hint of color touched the far peaks, and with it came a subtle shift in the air. The forest seemed to exhale. I looked back toward the tree line, my eyes aching, my body trembling from exhaustion. The shadow was gone. Not slipping away, not fading, just gone, as if it had never been there at all. I scanned frantically, heart racing anew, but there was nothing, just trees and early morning mist. The radio crackled suddenly, clean and sharp, nearly making me jump out of my skin. Base checking in, normal, casual, like nothing had happened. When my shift ended, I climbed down the tower on unsteady legs, every sound making me flinch. The forest felt ordinary again, almost mocking in its normalcy. Birds had returned. The wind stirred the treetops gently. I drove back along the mountain roads in silence, gripping the wheel until my knuckles ached, checking the mirrors far more often than necessary. I never reported the shadow. There was nothing concrete to report. No evidence. Just a feeling, a memory, an image burned into my mind. But even now, years later, whenever I drive those roads at night and catch a darker shape moving along the edge of my headlights, my chest tightens. I slow down. I watch the tree line. Because some part of me is still standing in that tower, alone in the dark, knowing with absolute certainty that something out there was watching me, and that it understood exactly where I was. The call came in just before dusk, the kind of report that sounded vague enough to be nothing and unsettling enough that it couldn't be ignored. Suspicious activity in a remote hollow, no clear description, just a local who'd sworn someone was moving through the trees near their property and then vanished. I almost brushed it off. Appalachia is full of false alarms. Deer, bears, people mistaking shadows for threats. Still, protocol was protocol, and by the time I parked my truck near the trailhead, the light was already draining out of the sky. The hollow sat low between two ridges, a place the sun never seemed to reach properly even during the day. Fog hung thick between the trees, clinging to the ground like damp breath. The moment I stepped off the gravel and onto the dirt path, the temperature dropped. My boots sounded wrong against the earth, each step oddly muted, like the fog itself was swallowing noise. I radioed in my location, got a crackling acknowledgement, and started down the trail with my flashlight, cutting a narrow tunnel ahead of me. At first, everything looked ordinary enough. Dense undergrowth, twisted trunks, moss creeping up the sides of rocks like slow-moving fingers. But the deeper I went, the more off it felt. Not dramatic, not sudden, just wrong. I noticed scuffed patches of dirt near the trail, branches bent low as if something had passed through recently. Not broken, bent, like whatever it was had been careful, deliberate. I knelt to inspect one of the marks, my light catching a faint impression in the mud that didn't quite resemble a boot or an animal track. It was elongated, dragged, as if weight had shifted strangely across the ground. That was when I heard movement. Not close, not far, just enough to register. A soft rustle to my left, then another to my right, like something circling without ever fully committing to being seen. I straightened slowly, scanning the fog, my grip tightening on the flashlight. "Ranger," I called out, my voice sounding thinner than I liked. "If anyone's out here, make yourself known." The words hung in the air for a moment before dissolving into the mist. No response. I moved forward again, slower now, every sense tuned tight. The forest seemed to lane in as I passed, branches brushing my sleeves, roots curling across the trail like they were trying to trip me. Every sound echoed unnaturally, my own breathing, the crunch of leaves, the distant drip of water somewhere unseen. It felt like the hollow was amplifying everything I did, announcing my presence to something that didn't want to be found. The feeling of being watched settled in gradually, a pressure at the back of my neck that refused to go away. I told myself it was nerves, the isolation getting to me, but the sensation only grew stronger the farther I went. Sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw movement, a darker shape sliding behind a tree, a shift in the fog that didn't match the breeze. Each time I turned my light toward it, there was nothing. Just trees, just mist. I checked my GPS. The signal wavered, then dropped entirely. That's when I realized the trail behind me didn't look the same. I turned around, expecting to see the narrow path winding back toward the trailhead, but what stared back at me was a wall of trees. Thick, penetrable, gnarled trunks pressed close together, roots snarling across the ground in a way that made it impossible to tell where the path had been. Panic flickered in my chest. Trails don't just vanish. I knew that. I forced myself to breathe, telling myself I'd just drifted off course a little. All I had to do was backtrack, but every step I took felt wrong. The forest seemed to shift around me, subtle enough that I couldn't point to anything specific, but unmistakable all the same. Trees I was sure I'd passed before appeared again, their shapes eerily familiar. The fog thickened, blurring distance and depth until everything beyond a few feet felt unreal. The sense of eyes on me intensified, heavy and unblinking. I could feel it in my spine, in the tightness of my shoulders. Like something was studying me from just beyond the edge of the light. A branch snapped behind me. I spun around, heart slamming against my ribs, flashlight swinging wildly. Nothing, but the sound hadn't been random. It had been paced, timed. Another snap followed, closer this time, perfectly matching the rhythm of my pulse. I backed away, my boot catching on a root, nearly sending me down. The snapping stopped. Silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. I whispered to myself without realizing it, telling myself to stay calm, to think, but thinking felt impossible in that place. The hollow didn't feel empty anymore. It felt occupied, not crowded, just claimed. I tried the radio again. Static, thick and unbroken like a wall. For a brief moment, I thought I heard something beneath it, a low, distorted sound that almost resembled breathing, but then it was gone. That's when I decided to run. I didn't pick a direction, I just moved, crashing through brush, branches scraping my face and arms, roots grabbing at my boots. The snapping followed immediately. Faster now, closer, keeping pace with me no matter how hard I pushed. It sounded like heavy limbs breaking wood with every step, yet I never heard breathing, never heard footsteps in the dirt. Just that awful, deliberate cracking, perfectly synchronized with my own frantic heartbeat. My lungs burned, my legs screamed. The fog blurred into a gray smear as tears stung my eyes. I didn't dare look back. Every instinct told me that if I did, I wouldn't like what I saw, or I wouldn't see anything at all, which felt even worse. The hollow seemed endless, looping in on itself, trees closing ranks as if trying to seal me inside. Then, through the fog, I saw metal. A dull reflection caught the edge of my flashlight beam, and I nearly sobbed with relief. I burst out of the trees and stumbled into the small clearing where I'd parked my truck. The snapping stopped abruptly, the silence so sudden it made my ears ring. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and locked it, hands shaking so badly I fumbled the keys twice before the engine finally turned over. I sat there for a moment, chest heaving, staring into the fog. The tree line looked ordinary again. Too ordinary. No movement, no sound. Just the hollow, quiet and still like it had never done anything at all. I told myself I was safe, that I'd made it out. But even as I pulled away, headlights sweeping across the trees, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was standing just beyond the reach of the light, watching me leave. The drive back felt longer than it should have. Every shadow along the road made my grip tighten on the steering wheel. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see something moving in the darkness behind me. Nothing ever did. By the time I reached the station, my nerves were shot, my uniform damp with sweat and fog. I filed the report the same way I always did, carefully, conservatively. Unconfirmed activity, poor visibility, lost trail due to terrain and weather. It all sounded reasonable on the paper. Safe. No mention of the snapping, or the way the forest seemed to bend around me, or the certainty that I hadn't been alone. I avoided that hollow after that. Found reasons to reroute patrols, suggested alternative paths. No one questioned it. Locals eventually stopped calling in reports from that area. Sometimes, on especially foggy nights, I catch myself thinking about it, the way the hollow felt like a trap that had almost closed. I still don't know what was out there. I'm not sure I want to. All I know is that some places don't just exist. They watch, they wait. And once they've noticed you, they never really forget. I hadn't planned on spending much time at the old ranger station. It was supposed to be a quick check, confirm the structure was still standing, note any damage, move on. The place had been abandoned long before I took the job. Shut down after a landslide made the access road unreliable. Most people forgot it existed. I hadn't, but standing there that afternoon, looking at the weathered building half swallowed by trees, I felt like I was intruding on something that wanted to stay forgotten. The station sat in a shallow dip between hills, the kind of place where fog settled early and lingered long after it should have burned off. The windows were dark, the glass clouded with grime, and the wooden siding had warped over the years, bowing outward like the building was exhaling. I announced myself out of habit before stepping inside, my voice echoing faintly and then dying away. The door creaked open, and a rush of stale, cold air rolled out to meet me, carrying the smell of dust, old paper, and damp rot. The first thing I noticed was the mess. Personal belongings were scattered across the floor as if someone had dumped the contents of their life in a hurry and never come back. A jacket hung half off a chair, its fabric stiff with age. An old ranger hat lay crushed near the doorway, the emblem faded but still visible. Papers littered the floor, reports, maps, handwritten notes, yellowed and brittle, edges curled like dead leaves. It didn't look like vandalism or decay alone. It looked interrupted, like the moment had been frozen right after something went wrong. As I stepped further inside, the floorboards groaned beneath my weight, and the papers shifted, fluttering softly as my boots disturbed the air. The sound made my skin prickle. It was too quiet otherwise. No wind whistling through broken windows, no animals nesting in the rafters, just that faint, papery rustle, following me as I moved. I crouched to examine one of the reports, the date smudged but clearly decades old. I wondered why no one had bothered to clean this place out, why everything had been left behind like this. That's when I heard the footsteps. They came from above me, slow and deliberate, pacing across the loft. One step, then another. The wood creaked under the weight, responding the same way it did beneath my own boots. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. For a split second, my mind scrambled for explanations. Another ranger, a squatter, maybe even an animal large enough to move like that. But I knew the sound of animals in old buildings. This wasn't scrambling or skittering, it was walking. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the open space. "Ranger service. Anyone up there?" The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise had. I stood there, listening hard, every muscle tense, waiting for something, anything to confirm I wasn't alone. Nothing came. After a long moment, I told myself I couldn't just leave it unexplored. If someone was up there, I needed to know. I raised my flashlight and aimed it toward the staircase at the back of the room. The stairs were narrow and steep, the wood worn smooth in the center from years of use. As I placed my foot on the first step, it groaned loudly, the sound echoing up into the loft. I waited, heart pounding, but there was no response. I climbed slowly, each step deliberate, my flashlight beam trembling slightly despite my effort to steady it. Shadows clung to the corners, stretching and bending as I moved, making the loft feel farther away than it should have been. At the top of the stairs, The loft opened into a low-ceilinged space cluttered with old desks and filing cabinets. Dust coated everything, undisturbed. No footprints, no signs of recent movement. The air was stale, unmoving. I swept the light across the room, checking behind furniture, peering into dark corners. Nothing. No one. The realization settled uneasily in my gut. I knew what I'd heard. I was certain of it. I turned back toward the stairs and stopped. They didn't look the same. The staircase seemed longer now, stretching down into the gloom in a way that made my eyes ache. The shadows between the steps were deeper, twisting in on themselves, as if the space below had grown taller and narrower at the same time. I blinked, shook my head, told myself it was just the angle, the light playing tricks on me. Still, I hesitated. Something about the stairs felt wrong, like they weren't just leading down anymore, but somewhere else entirely. I took one step. The creak echoed longer than before, rippling through the building. For a moment, I thought I heard something answer it from below. A soft shift, like someone adjusting their weight. My chest tightened. I took another step, then another, my pace quickening despite myself. The shadows seemed to slide along the walls as I moved, stretching toward me, retreating just out of reach. Halfway down, the sense of being watched hit me all at once. It wasn't subtle. It was a certainty, sharp and undeniable. I felt it at my back, above me, around me, like the building itself had turned its attention fully in my direction. My breathing grew shallow. The flashlight beam wavered, briefly catching the wall, and for just a second, I thought I saw a shape there, darker than the rest of the shadow, leaning inward. I didn't look again. I bolted. The rest of the descent blurred together. I don't remember counting the steps, only the sensation of the stairs never quite ending, my footfall chasing itself into the dark. When I finally reached the bottom, I didn't slow down. I ran through the main room, paper scattering under my boots, the air suddenly alive with sound. The door felt too far away, the space between us stretching the same way the stairs had. I burst outside and nearly fell down the front steps, gasping for air like I'd been underwater too long. The daylight hit me hard, bright and unforgiving. I stood there bent over, hands on my knees, forcing myself to breathe. The forest around the station was still, ordinary. Birds called somewhere in the distance. The wind moved gently through the trees. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought nothing was wrong at all. But I couldn't shake the feeling. Even as I walked away from the building, I felt it, an awareness lingering behind me, patient and unblinking. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see the station again, didn't want to know if something was standing in the doorway watching me leave. I got into my truck and drove off without looking back, my heart still racing long after the station disappeared from view. I filed the report later that day. Structural decay. Evidence of old occupancy. No mention of the footsteps, no mention of the stairs. The words felt thin, inadequate, but they were safer that way. Some things don't belong in official records. Even now, years later, I think about that station more often than I should. Sometimes I dream about climbing those stairs again, about the way the space seemed to bend and stretch around me. Sometimes I wake up convinced I hear slow, deliberate footsteps overhead, even though I live alone. I tell myself it was stress, imagination, the weight of an old place pressing down on my mind. But deep down, I know that building wasn't empty. It was waiting. And I have the unsettling sense that in some quiet, unseen way, it still is. I'd driven that back road dozens of times before, usually during the day, usually in a hurry to get somewhere else. That night, I wasn't in any rush. My shift had ended late, and instead of taking the long way around, I cut through the forest like I always did when I wanted quiet. The road was barely wide enough for one vehicle, just a ribbon of cracked asphalt winding between tall Appalachian hardwoods. No houses, no lights, just trees and the occasional reflector nailed into a trunk, blinking weakly as my headlights passed. The radio was on low, mostly for company. Out here, stations faded in and out like ghosts, dissolving into static without warning. I didn't mind it. The noise helped keep my thoughts from drifting too far into the dark. I remember thinking how still everything felt. No wind, no insects. Even the tires seemed quieter than usual against the road. That was when the static changed. At first, it was subtle, just a shift in tone, like someone had leaned closer to a microphone. I reached out to adjust the dial, expecting the sound to snap back into useless noise. Instead, a voice slipped through. It said my name, not shouted, not whispered, just spoken, plainly, like someone sitting in the passenger seat. My hand froze on the knob. The sound crawled straight up my spine, raising goosebumps along my arms. I laughed once, short and nervous, telling myself it was interference. That happens out here. Radios pick up weird things in the mountains. Snippets of conversations, overlapping signals, anything but what it sounded like. Then the voice came again. It stretched my name out this time, slow and deliberate, as if whoever was speaking wanted to be sure I was listening. There was no static underneath it now, no distortion. Just a calm, steady tone that felt entirely out of place. I pulled over before I consciously decided to. The truck rolled to a stop on the gravel shoulder, engine idling. The headlights carved two pale tunnels into the trees ahead, illuminating nothing but trunks and low branches. I sat there for a second, listening to my own breathing, suddenly loud in the cab. "Hello?" I said, hating how small my voice sounded. No response. The radio crackled softly, then went quiet. That almost felt worse. I shut it off completely and opened the door. Cold air rushed in, thick with the smell of damp earth and leaves. The forest absorbed the sound of the engine, muting it until it felt distant, unreal. I stepped out and grabbed my flashlight from the seat. The beam cut into the trees, revealing nothing unusual. No movement, no eyes reflecting back. Still, the woods felt wrong. Too dense, too close. Like the darkness between the trees had weight to it. That's when the radio came back on. I hadn't touched it. From inside the truck, the static burst to life, and my name echoed out again, sharper now, edged with something that sounded almost impatient. It wasn't loud, but it carried, threading through the silence in a way that made my chest tighten. I backed away from the truck, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The voice followed, no longer sounding like it came from the radio alone. It felt scattered, like it was bouncing off the trees, seeping out of the undergrowth, pressing in from all sides. Each time it said my name, it sounded slightly different. Same voice, but closer, clearer, more certain. I didn't answer. Every instinct I had told me that responding would be a mistake. I'd heard enough stories growing up in these mountains, about voices that didn't belong to anyone, about things that learned you before you ever saw them. I'd never believed them completely, but standing there in the dark, belief didn't feel optional. I ran. I don't remember turning back toward the truck, only the sensation of movement, of my boots hitting gravel too hard. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut as if something might try to follow. My hands shook so badly I fumbled the keys before the engine finally roared to life. As I pulled back onto the road, the radio screamed. My name poured out of it, layered over itself, overlapping, as if more than one signal had found the same frequency. Some of it sounded distant, some of it uncomfortably close. I turned the volume down, then off, But the sound kept bleeding through, quieter but still there, riding under the silence like a second heartbeat. I drove faster than I should have, headlights bouncing wildly as the road twisted downhill. The forest blurred past, branches reaching toward the pavement, the darkness pressing closer the farther I went. Every few minutes, the radio crackled again, my name slipping through like a reminder. It finally stopped just before I reached the edge of town. The sudden silence felt heavier than the noise had. I slowed down without meaning to, half expecting the voice to return, to fill the space it had left behind. It didn't. Streetlights appeared, warm and ordinary, and houses replaced trees. Life resumed like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the static again, felt that calm, patient tone saying my name like it had always known it. For weeks afterward, I avoided that road, taking the long way no matter how tired I was. I told myself it was over. A glitch, a coincidence stretched too thin by nerves and darkness. But even now, years later, whenever I pass near that stretch of forest, my radio starts acting up. Just for a second. Just enough static to make my breath catch. And sometimes, very faint, buried deep in the noise, I swear I hear my name again, waiting for me to listen.